Ethan Carter had always believed that a garden was more than just rows of plants. It was a living legacy. Tucked away on a modest patch of countryside, his property was his sanctuary, where generations of his family had nurtured rare heirloom varieties and unique culinary treasures. Among his prize crops were his pickling flowers, delicate blossoms known for adding an unexpected zing to homemade pickles and artisanal preserves. For Ethan, these flowers weren't merely ornamental. They represented his passion for organic gardening and his dedication to preserving traditional recipes passed down over decades. A retired chef and a dedicated horticulturist, Ethan's days began before sunrise as he tended to his vibrant garden. He loved the gentle hum of bees, the earthy aroma of rich soil, and the satisfying crunch of freshly plucked vegetables. Every petal and leaf had a story, every bloom a secret ingredient. His garden was his refuge, a place where creativity met tradition, and where nature's bounty was celebrated in every harvest. Yet not everyone in the community shared Ethan's reverence for natural beauty and culinary heritage. Over the past few months, whispers about the local homeowners association's HOA overreach had grown louder. At the helm of this bureaucratic machine was Karen Miller, a woman who prided herself on enforcing her own rigid vision of order and perfection. Clad in impeccably pressed skirts, polished shoes, and an ever-present clipboard, Karen roamed the neighborhood like a self-appointed arbiter of taste and propriety. To her, every property, no matter how unique or lovingly maintained, was subject to her exacting rules. The conflict ignited on a particularly warm summer afternoon. Ethan had just finished harvesting a fresh batch of his pickling flowers, arranging them meticulously in his greenhouse for the upcoming season of pickling experiments. As he moved among his prized blooms, he heard raised voices coming from the edge of his property. Stepping outside, he found a group of Karen's friends, fellow HOA members in identical pastel outfits, assembling on his lawn. They had set up a picnic right among his flower beds, complete with crisp white tablecloths and an array of artisanal snacks. In the center of it all stood Karen, smiling smugly as she surveyed the scene. "Ethan, darling," Karen cooed, her tone dripping with false warmth, "I couldn't help but notice that your garden could use a little community spirit. The HOA believes in sharing our neighborhood's beauty, and your pickling flowers are simply too exquisite not to be enjoyed by everyone." Ethan's heart sank. His pickling flowers were the result of years of careful cultivation, a secret blend of heirloom varieties that made his preserves legendary at the local farmer's market. "Karen," he replied, his voice steady but firm, "this is my property. These flowers are my livelihood and my heritage. I did not give permission for your picnic, nor for anyone to take what belongs to me." Karen's smile faltered for just a moment before she straightened her posture and held up a printed notice emblazoned with the HOA seal. "According to the new community guidelines," she declared imperiously, "all properties must contribute to the neighborhood's aesthetics and communal spirit. Your refusal to share is, frankly, a violation of our standards." A hush fell over the impromptu gathering as neighbors peeked from behind hedges and open windows. For Ethan, this confrontation was not simply about a misplaced picnic. It was a blatant intrusion into his right to cultivate his own garden, his very way of life. The pickling flowers, which he had nurtured with love and care, were now at risk of being commandeered by an entitled group whose only aim was to enforce conformity. Ethan's eyes blazed with quiet determination as he met Karen's gaze. "I respect community and tradition," he said, "but not the cost of losing control over my own garden. My pickling flowers are a part of who I am. They represent decades of family legacy and hard work. I won't allow them to be treated as mere props for your social events." Karen's tone grew sharper. "Mr. Carter, you are being uncooperative. The HOA rules apply to everyone equally, and noncompliance will result in penalties. Consider this your first and final warning." With that, she turned and, flanked by her cronies, marched away, leaving behind a stunned silence and a garden that suddenly felt vulnerable. Standing alone among his cherished blooms, Ethan felt a deep sense of injustice. This wasn't simply a dispute over a picnic. It was the beginning of a battle between individual freedom and bureaucratic overreach, a battle that would test the very limits of his dedication to tradition. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over his garden, Ethan silently vowed that he would defend his legacy at all costs. He would not allow Karen's self-appointed authority to trample on the values that had been passed down through generations. The following morning, Ethan awoke to a jolt. A thick envelope taped to his front door bearing the unmistakable seal of the HOA. With a mix of trepidation and indignation, he tore it open to reveal a fine of $750, accompanied by a scathing notice for failure to comply with communal display regulations. The language was heavy with legalese, designed to intimidate and assert the HOA's control over his private property. Before Ethan could fully absorb the implications of the notice, he saw Karen waiting at the edge of his driveway. Dressed in her signature power suit and sporting a haughty smile, she greeted him with, "Good morning, Ethan. I trust you've read our notice? The rules apply to everyone, and it's imperative that we maintain our community standards." Her tone was as crisp as her tailored outfit, leaving no doubt that she considered dissent unthinkable. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Karen, my garden is my property. I've spent years cultivating these pickling flowers. They're my livelihood, my heritage. Your fine is nothing more than a bully's tactic." His voice was measured, but every word carried the weight of his resolve. Unfazed by his protest, Karen merely tilted her chin upward. "We are all part of this community, Ethan. Your failure to contribute to our shared aesthetic is unacceptable. Compliance isn't optional, it's a requirement." Later that day, while Ethan was busy tending to his remaining crops and salvaging what he could of his disrupted garden, a nondescript van pulled up along the fence line. Out stepped two inspectors in official-looking uniforms, clipboards in hand. They began a meticulous examination of his property, measuring the layout of his flower beds, snapping photos of every corner, and noting any perceived deviations from the prescribed standards. All the while, Karen hovered nearby like a hawk, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Ethan, his heart pounding with a mix of anger and determination, began to document the intrusion. He snapped photos with his phone, recorded snippets of the inspector's conversations, and jotted down every detail in a weathered notebook. Each piece of evidence was a small rebellion, a refusal to be cowed by the arbitrary edicts of an overzealous HOA. That evening, as dusk settled over his property, Ethan sat at his battered wooden desk inside the farmhouse. With the fine glaring on his desk and his notes spread out before him, he drafted a formal complaint to the local zoning office. He cited long-established agricultural exemptions, historical preservation statutes, and even testimonials from longtime neighbors who had witnessed similar abuses. His complaint was both a legal challenge and a personal manifesto, a declaration that his garden, with its unique pickling flowers, would not be exploited for the sake of community image. Across the neighborhood, whispers spread like wildfire. At the local market and community feed store, residents murmured about the increasing boldness of the HOA and the arbitrary fines that had begun to plague independent property owners. Even those who had long tolerated Karen's strict rule were beginning to question the fairness of it all. As night deepened, Karen returned to Ethan's property with another notice, this one demanding that he immediately reconfigure his garden to meet the new standards. Standing beneath the soft glow of a single porch light, she issued her ultimatum in a tone that brooked no argument. "You have 48 hours to comply, or further penalties will be imposed." Ethan's response was calm and resolute. "I will continue to tend to my garden the way I've always done. My pickling flowers are not for public display. They are my legacy." With that, Karen departed, leaving Ethan to contemplate the uphill battle that lay ahead. That night, as the farmhouse settled into quiet darkness, Ethan's resolve only grew stronger. The fine was a sting, but it was also a call to arms, a call to defend the freedoms that allowed him to cultivate his heritage. In the silence, amidst the rustle of wind through the trees, Ethan vowed to stand firm against the encroaching tyranny of an HOA that cared more about appearances than the soul of the community. In the days following the fine, the conflict at Ethan's garden escalated into an all-out battle for his rights. The initial imposition of fines and intrusive inspections was only the beginning. Whispers of corruption and abuse within the HOA began to surface. Neighbors who had quietly endured similar overreach started confiding in Ethan about their own grievances, tales of arbitrary fines, unexplained penalties, and even mysterious donations that seemed to line the pockets of a select few. One overcast afternoon, while Ethan was repairing a section of his garden fence, his longtime friend and fellow gardener, Lisa, pulled up beside him. "Ethan, you're not alone in this," she said in a hushed tone. "I've heard that Karen's been redirecting fines into a secret fund for her personal projects. People are scared, but they're starting to talk." Her words struck a chord deep within him. What had begun as a personal infringement was revealing itself as part of a much larger pattern of corruption. Determined to uncover the full extent of the abuse, Ethan embarked on a covert investigation. He made discreet trips to the county clerk's office to examine HOA records, attended local board meetings incognito, and even managed to record snippets of heated exchanges among board members. Every piece of evidence he gathered painted a damning picture. The HOA, under Karen's iron-fisted leadership, was exploiting its power for personal gain rather than serving the community. Late one stormy night, as rain battered the farmhouse windows, Ethan pored over photocopies of financial ledgers and handwritten notes from anonymous sources. He compiled his findings into a detailed dossier, a tangible record of the corruption festering within the HOA. The evidence was undeniable. Karen's actions were not about maintaining community standards at all. They were about control and profit. Word of Ethan's investigation began to spread among the community. At a secret meeting held in the back room of the local diner, several frustrated homeowners recounted their own experiences of arbitrary fines and invasive inspections. One elderly man tearfully explained how a minor discrepancy in his garden layout had resulted in a punitive fine that nearly bankrupted him. Another woman admitted that she had been coerced into making voluntary contributions that never seemed to benefit anyone but the HOA leadership. The room buzzed with collective outrage as Ethan shared his compiled evidence. Meanwhile, Karen's tactics grew ever more aggressive. In a series of curt official letters, she warned that noncompliance with the new guidelines could result in the seizure of property rights, an ultimatum that sent shivers down the spines of many independent property owners. Rumors began to circulate that the HOA might even resort to using legal force to reclaim portions of gardens deemed unsightly. Every day, as Ethan walked among his rows of pickling flowers, a sight that now carried the weight of both beauty and defiance, his determination only hardened. He installed additional security cameras along the perimeter of his property, meticulously logging every intrusion, every moment of intimidation. His phone became a trusted ally, capturing audio recordings of confrontations and snapping photos of inspectors in action. Each documented incident was a small act of rebellion, a step toward exposing a system built on exploitation and fear. Emboldened by the mounting evidence and the solidarity of a community ready for change, Ethan reached out to local journalists. He handed over copies of the financial records, the recordings, and the photographs that painted a vivid picture of HOA corruption. The story began to gain traction, and soon local newspapers carried headlines that denounced the arbitrary fines and invasive practices imposed by Karen's regime. Under the dark skies of a stormy night, as lightning illuminated the fields and thunder echoed in the distance, Ethan stood resolute. He knew that this battle was about much more than his pickling flowers. It was about preserving the right to cultivate one's own land without the interference of a power-hungry bureaucracy. With evidence in hand and a community awakening to the truth, Ethan vowed that he would fight back with every resource at his disposal. The struggle against Karen's tyranny had only just begun. The tension in the neighborhood reached a fever pitch on a sultry summer morning when Ethan arrived at his garden only to find it in disarray. Overnight, a group of HOA enforcers had invaded his property, uprooting entire sections of his carefully tended pickling flowers. The vibrant blossoms, once a symbol of his hard work and passion, lay scattered and trampled. In their place, Hastily erected signs proclaimed Community Beautification Zone in bold, insistent letters. Fury and sorrow welled up in Ethan as he surveyed the destruction. This wasn't merely vandalism. It was an overt act of defiance against his right to manage his own garden. Determined not to let Karen and her cronies get away with this blatant violation, Ethan gathered his evidence and prepared for his next move. Later that day, at a specially called HOA meeting held in the town hall, Ethan took center stage. The room was packed with tense homeowners and anxious board members, all there to hear Karen's version of events. With quiet authority, Ethan began to present the undeniable proof of the invasion. Photographs of his devastated garden, video clips of inspectors wandering through his property, and copies of the arbitrary notices he had received. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ethan declared, his voice resonating across the room, "what you see here is not about aesthetics or community standards. This is about the violation of my property and the erosion of our rights as individuals. My pickling flowers are a cherished legacy, and no group of self-appointed enforcers has the right to take them away from me." A murmur of approval rippled through the audience. As Ethan laid out his evidence, even some previously silent board members began to exchange disapproving glances. Karen, however, refused to be cowed. Standing at the back of the room, she retorted with a rehearsed smile, "These actions were taken in the interest of community beauty and safety. You must understand, Mr. Carter, that these rules are in place for the greater good." But as Ethan continued, he revealed another piece of his counterattack, a secret plan born of both ingenuity and righteous vengeance. "If the HOA insists on controlling what grows on my land, then I will take matters into my own hands," he announced. "I have already begun replanting my garden. But these new plants are not your ordinary blooms. They are poison ivy interspersed among my pickling flowers, designed to reclaim my garden and serve as a reminder that intrusion has consequences." The room fell into shocked silence. Poison ivy, notorious for its irritating properties, was a bold and symbolic choice. Ethan explained that he had carefully cultivated a patch of poison ivy, not to harm anyone, but to serve as a natural deterrent against future invasions. "This is not an act of malice," he said softly, "but a reclamation of my rights. I will not allow my land to be treated as a playground for bureaucratic overreach." The audience erupted in murmurs and whispers. Many saw this as a brilliant, if unconventional, act of defiance, a way to turn the tables on a system that had trampled on their freedoms for too long. Even as Karen's face turned a shade of crimson, her voice faltering in response to the overwhelming evidence and passionate words, Ethan's resolve shone through. That evening, under a sky streaked with the colors of sunset, Ethan returned to his garden. With careful hands and a determined heart, he replanted his pickling flowers, this time interwoven with clusters of poison ivy. He recorded every moment, knowing that the footage would serve as a testament to his stand against injustice. As he worked, the garden transformed into a living symbol of resistance, a bold fusion of beauty and nature's retribution. The act was not merely symbolic. Over the coming days, as neighbors and passers-by encountered the unexpected combination of vibrant flowers and the unmistakable signs of poison ivy, word of Ethan's counterattack spread like wildfire. It became a rallying cry, a declaration that no one, not even the tyrannical Karen, could dictate what grew on someone else's land. Reeling from the public exposure and the dramatic turn of events in Ethan's garden, Karen was determined to salvage her authority by any means necessary. In what she believed would be her final power move, she organized an emergency inspection of Ethan's property, this time with a more aggressive and unyielding approach. Late one evening, as a thick fog descended upon the neighborhood, Karen arrived at Ethan's farm with a small group of armed inspectors and local security officers. Clad in a dark overcoat and armed with stern orders, she declared that Ethan's garden was in a state of imminent hazard due to the invasive nature of the newly planted poison ivy. "This is a public safety issue," she announced forcefully, "and if you do not immediately remove these dangerous plants, you will face severe legal consequences." Ethan, who had anticipated such an escalation, met Karen outside his garden with calm determination. "Karen," he said steadily, "you claim I'm endangering public health. Yet it's your actions that have introduced these challenges. My garden is my property, and I have every right to cultivate it as I see fit." His voice was measured, but every word resonated with the strength of his conviction. Not willing to back down, Karen ordered the inspectors to begin dismantling sections of the garden immediately. As they advanced, Ethan activated his security cameras, recording the unfolding events. Hidden within the recordings was a candid moment. A private investigator hired by Karen, creeping around the edge of the property in a desperate bid to gather incriminating evidence against Ethan. The footage captured the investigator's furtive movements and whispered instructions to Karen over a walkie-talkie, evidence that would later prove that Karen's tactics had crossed the line into illegality. At the next HOA meeting, packed with outraged homeowners and anxious board members, Ethan presented the damning video footage. The room fell into shocked silence as the grainy images of the investigators' covert actions played on the big screen. "This," Ethan declared, "is proof that Karen is willing to resort to espionage and illegal tactics to maintain her stranglehold on this community. My garden, which you see as a source of disorder, is actually under siege by a corrupt system." Karen, red-faced and visibly rattled, attempted to interject. "That footage is circumstantial," she cried, but her protests were drowned out by the collective murmur of disapproval from the audience. The evidence was clear and undeniable. Desperate to regain control, Karen issued a final ultimatum from the podium. "If you do not comply with the HOA's regulations by removing all non-approved plant species, including that poison ivy, I will have no choice but to escalate the matter further with law enforcement." Her voice, once commanding, now trembled with the strain of mounting pressure. Ethan's response was measured and resolute. "I have complied with the law and with my right to tend to my own property. I will not be bullied into erasing my heritage. My pickling flowers, interlaced with poison ivy, represent my stand against arbitrary power. Today, I am not just defending my garden, I am defending our right to live free of needless regulation." The meeting ended with a resounding roar of support for Ethan, and Karen's final, desperate move was met with overwhelming public backlash. The seeds of her downfall had been sown, and every new piece of evidence further undermined her credibility. In the days following the explosive HOA meeting, the community began to mobilize. What had started as a personal battle over a beloved garden had now erupted into a full-scale uprising against the tyranny of the HOA. Homeowners, once too fearful to speak out, gathered in town halls and community centers, recounting years of arbitrary fines, invasive inspections, and the humiliation inflicted by Karen's relentless overreach. At one such town hall meeting, an impassioned speech from a longtime resident captured the mood of the entire neighborhood. "We will no longer stand for this oppression," the resident declared, his voice shaking with emotion. "Our homes, our gardens, our lives are not for the taking by a self-appointed enforcer." The rallying cry resonated deeply, galvanizing support for Ethan's cause. Amid growing public outcry, the HOA board convened an emergency meeting. Pressure mounted from all sides, and when the minutes were later made public, it was clear that many board members had begun questioning Karen's decisions. In a historic vote that was broadcast live at a community event, the board unanimously decided to remove Karen from her position as HOA president. The decision was met with cheers and tears of relief from the assembled homeowners, who finally saw a glimmer of hope. Simultaneously, local authorities launched a full-scale investigation into the HOA's practices. Auditors uncovered a labyrinth of misappropriated funds, forged documents, and a systematic pattern of extortion. Headlines in the local press screamed of HOA tyranny dismantled, and community rises against corruption, and the public outcry forced the city council to intervene. Karen's personal assets were frozen, and within weeks, her home was listed for sale amid scandal and disgrace. For Ethan, the victory was bittersweet. His garden had been scarred by the conflict, his precious pickling flowers trampled, and his innovative counterattack with poison ivy had become a symbol of resistance. Yet, as he stood on his porch watching the neighborhood come together in solidarity, he felt a profound sense of vindication. The oppressive regime had finally crumbled, replaced by a promise of fairness and respect for individual rights. In the aftermath of the board's decision, the new community council was formed with a commitment to transparency and accountability. Homeowners began to regain their voice, and town meetings turned into vibrant forums for discussion and decision-making. Ethan's garden, though forever marked by the struggle, became a symbol of resilience, a living testament to the power of community action against tyranny. Every day, as the sun set over the rejuvenated neighborhood, Ethan could see the transformation taking place. The fields once overrun by arbitrary fines were now filled with laughter and the shared joy of reclaiming one's rights. And in the midst of it all, Ethan's garden, replanted with both his beloved pickling flowers and the stinging reminder of poison ivy, stood as a beacon of triumph over injustice. As the public outcry reached its peak, legal authorities moved decisively against the corrupt HOA. Bolstered by Ethan's meticulous documentation and the overwhelming evidence of abuse, the county imposed hefty fines on the organization for numerous violations. Investigations revealed a tangled web of misappropriated funds, forged documents, and systematic intimidation that had plagued the community for years. A series of class action lawsuits was filed on behalf of the affected homeowners. In court, the judge reviewed pages of evidence, photos of Ethan's trampled garden, video footage of unauthorized inspections, and audio recordings of Karen's threatening ultimatums. The ruling was swift and uncompromising. The HOA was to be dissolved, its assets frozen pending further legal action, and its leadership held accountable for their abuses. Local media seized upon the story, and headlines declared the end of an era of arbitrary rule. The state attorney general even launched an independent task force to oversee the restructuring of neighborhood associations, ensuring that such tyranny would never be allowed to flourish again. For many residents, this legal victory was more than just a win against bureaucracy. It was a vindication of their right to live freely and maintain their cherished traditions. Ethan's role in these proceedings was lauded by legal advocates and community leaders alike. His tireless efforts to document every injustice had laid the groundwork for a comprehensive case against the HOA. The public and the courts alike recognized that no one was above the law, and that even the most entrenched abuses of power could be dismantled by collective action. As the legal dust settled, the old HOA was officially declared defunct, and a new model for community governance was put in place, one founded on transparency, accountability, and respect for individual property rights. Ethan's final power move had not only saved his garden, but had set a precedent that would protect countless other homeowners from similar exploitation. With the legal and public battles won, Karen's personal world began to unravel. Once the formidable face of HOA authority, she now found herself a pariah, her reputation in tatters. Public scrutiny mounted as evidence of her corrupt practices was laid bare in court. Her lavish lifestyle, fueled by exorbitant fines and misappropriated funds, crumbled as her bank accounts were frozen and her assets seized. In a dramatic turn of events, Karen was forced to resign from her position amid a media frenzy and a tidal wave of public outrage. Gossip spread quickly through the community. Her once impeccable car was repossessed, and whispers of a crumbling personal life filled the local coffee shops. The final, bitter irony came when Karen, desperate for any semblance of employment, accepted a low-level position as an assistant property manager for another HOA, a body that prided itself on strict adherence to rules she had once imposed with reckless abandon. One brisk morning, as Ethan drove past the modest office building where Karen now worked, he caught a glimpse of her exiting the building in plain, unremarkable attire. A wry smile tugged at his lips as he murmured under his breath, "I hope you like following the rules." The remark, though quiet, spread quickly among neighbors and became the emblem of her downfall, a fitting end for a woman whose authority had been built on the subjugation of others. Interviews with former board members and disgruntled residents painted a unanimous picture. Karen's reign of terror was over, and her legacy would forever serve as a cautionary tale about the abuse of power. Her public humiliation, compounded by legal consequences, ensured that her once feared persona would be remembered only as an example of arrogance and entitlement gone wrong. For Ethan, Karen's personal collapse was both a personal victory and a symbol of justice. His garden, scarred by conflict yet vibrant with a defiant intermingling of pickling flowers and poison ivy, stood as a testament to the community's resilience and his unwavering dedication to preserving his heritage. In the months following the dismantling of the corrupt HOA and Karen's public downfall, the community of Maple Grove began to heal. The fields and gardens, once marred by the scars of bureaucratic tyranny, now bloomed with renewed vigor and hope. Ethan's garden, with its unusual yet defiant mix of cherished pickling flowers and stinging poison ivy, became a living symbol of resistance, a beacon that reminded everyone of the power of standing up for one's rights. At a celebratory community picnic held on a bright autumn afternoon, neighbors gathered to mark a new era of transparency and freedom. Laughter filled the air as families enjoyed home-cooked meals and children ran freely among the blossoming gardens. A local artist unveiled a humorous mural depicting a red-faced Karen tangled in vines of poison ivy, a final mic drop on the tyranny that had once held them captive. Seated on his porch with a cup of steaming coffee, Ethan watched the festivities with quiet satisfaction. The pain of past injustices had given way to a shared sense of triumph and community spirit. When a longtime friend approached him, holding up a mock HOA violation notice for excessive defiance and unruly garden ingenuity, Ethan simply grinned and replied, "They really tried." In that moment, as the sun dipped low over Maple Grove and painted the sky in hues of gold and pink, the memory of oppressive rules faded into the background. The legacy of Karen's misdeeds was transformed into a cautionary tale, a reminder that true power lies not in enforcing conformity, but in nurturing the unique spirit of community. Fade to black,